as outlined by the first 100 men and women. And tonight we're going to start this meeting off with the set-aside prayer.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Joe, alcoholic. I didn't say that, no?
No. Everybody knows you're an alcoholic, but there might be a couple new people here that's, you know.
Yeah, I love you. Okay. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my illness, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. Thanks.
Right on. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989. We're just finishing up the last part of the series on step 11, going into 12. And we're going to tie this all together tonight. We're going to look at some meditation, different forms of meditation. A lot of people maybe expand your ideas what that means. And I'll pass on what was taught to me and kind of how I utilize this stuff. And we'll use the book on the scope and the design of this thing. So like what was talked about earlier, have a pen and paper. If anything, you're kind of like the book should be kind of approached like eating fish. I don't know if anybody's eating fish here. When you get a bone, it's kind of like something, it's like taking it aside, taking it out and putting it aside instead of keep choking on the bone, right? Take what you're kind of not agreeing with, like the bone, and put it aside and carry on with the rest of it and revisit it later. And I challenge you, use the book and see what the book says in regards to that, right? Because what we do here is we get back to the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous and the language contained in the book that this thing was put together by. They all agreed on a certain language and a certain terminology that we've seen to get away from, right? And those people who've been through the book and kind of look back realize how far some of the fellowship's gone from the message in the book, right? And then when you kind of get into this thing, you kind of really comprehend the design of it and why they use certain language and terminology as you go through it, right? And so their hope was that those who kind of went through this based on their understanding of their experience would have the same experience. And I've never met really anybody who's ever gone through this the way it's outlined based on their understanding and their experience and doing the same thing that they didn't get what they got, right? And so over the last 32 years, including coming up to 32 years actually in April, I've never met anybody who's ever done this and maintained it who's ever relapsed. Not one person. I've met a lot of people who've kind of done this or done a version of this or done their own program of this or their own ideas of this and who find it really hard to get sober. Like a lot of people do fellowship sobriety. Oh, that sounds good. That sounds good. But it don't work worth shit, right? Anybody ever relapse here? Probably not this group. Eh? Everybody first time got this right off the hop. Genius type minds. And so like we're the type of kind of people that come to a meeting and think one of the slogans says, figure it out. Anybody like that here? Anybody ever sit in a meeting and try to figure it out? I wonder how this works. I wonder what this is about. And then they say, we're going to read how it works. They're reading how it works and you're thinking how it works. I wonder how this works. They're reading it, right? So, like, it's all laid out. Like, the whole meeting is designed to kind of give you the format of this thing. Anybody ever hear the preamble? They do the preamble. They tell you what the fellowship's about. Then they read how it works as the collective experience of those that put this together. And they say, if you want what we have, it's contained in this book. Right, and here's the suggested program that they put together. But we're the type of people that don't actually think we need to do the book to figure this out. I'll just go to meetings and figure this out. Anybody like that here? The books are for people who don't have a genius type mind like myself, right? Because like I could pick the smartest person in the room. I know what they sound like, and I'll just sound like them at the next meeting I go to. Anybody like that here? And so we're doing other people's experiences at other meetings. So what I'm saying is somebody else is experiencing, hoping it would be my experience. Anybody ever been to a study where you read the book a bit and talk about something totally different? Right? And I like the people who sit around and try to figure out a paragraph. It's impossible to figure out a paragraph. You need to read what's leading into the paragraph and what follows the paragraph to kind of comprehend what it's getting at. So, by the time we, like Tuesday nights, we go over steps 1, 2, and 3 as laid out by the first 100 men and women. And we got from there that the whole point of this thing is to find out what their understanding is of this, right? What the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action is, right? And so my job is to kind of gather that information and make a decision whether I need to do this or not based on the information given me. So if you're kind of here on a Thursday night, we already made that determination. I need to get this thing and I need to develop it in such a way where I can maintain and develop this daily reprieve, because that's what keeps me sober. My experience with me and my illness doesn't keep me sober, right? Because I used to be afflicted with an illness that I'm no longer afflicted with today. I'm still alcoholic, but I'm no longer suffering from alcoholism. I've recovered from that condition. And what I have is a daily reprieve contingent on this stuff. So it's very important for me to learn what this stuff is if I'm going to develop it, right? And so as they were talking about this, is we're going to kind of look at the introduction of what they're talking with working with others, and then we'll kind of go backwards. So if you have a pen and paper, kind of take some highlights, some notes, and this will be the last part of the series, and we're kind of recording this, and you could follow up on it later. So who's reading for us tonight? Katie or...
No, it's going to be Rob tonight.
Okay, so Rob, you want to hit us up on page 89, and you're just going to kind of do the first paragraph, the bright spot of our lives. So we've just finished reading through 11. We're kind of looking at developing it, and we'll go back up. Now what are we going to do? On page 88, they said now we need action and more action. So there's two groups of ideas that we're going to move forward with, right? The two groups of ideas is, the one group is the ideas contained in step 11. The next group of ideas is, how do I carry this message to the still suffering alcoholic as it was done with me? They're saying here, by this time the change should be taking place, or you have the recipe to put in the application. Now how am I going to carry this to other people? So where they talk about the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program is in the first 88 pages in the doctor's opinion and the spiritual appendix. If I didn't have the rest of the book, I would develop that by carrying this message to others. What they're doing is putting their collective experience on how we could better do that. You know, on page 164, you hear a lot of people say, we only know little. You ever hear anybody make reference to that?
Oh, yeah,
to demean or discredit the message being... What they're talking about on that page is 12-step work. A lot of people take the one thing, we only know little. What did it say going into that paragraph and following that paragraph is 12-step work.
Yeah.
Right? So this whole book from here on forward is how I could best practice these principles in these different areas and how I could be of service. Right? So go ahead on page 89.
Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as extensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives.
So, by the time I get here, I'm carrying this message, not a message. Yeah. I become a part of the collective. I'm carrying the same message as the first 100 men and women did. And since thousands. When they started this, the introduction was, we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. In the fourth edition, when you got to, there is a solution, they said since thousands. And then the introduction to this thing, at the beginning of the book, when they first opened it, it talked about here, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. But all those people have a few things in common. One, they were afflicted with the same illness. Two, they were given the same solution. and they applied the same course of action to get the same results. All of them would carry and sound the same at every meeting they went, with a little different spin on their experience with these things, but they would all sound the same, would they not?
Yep.
So if you go to a carpentry shop, would all carpenters kind of sound the same when describing their work? And same with mechanics, same with doctors, so they specialize in certain areas. And that's the same with this being a basic text, is the transferring of information. So here, when we go to page 96, and then we'll kind of just to reiterate some of these things. So I need this to be of the same understanding and the same experience of the first 100 men and women. So is this thing become singular or collective once I've gone through it? Collective. It gets away from, well, for me, recovery. That's that treatment center stuff and outside influence stuff that we try to bring into the fellowship, right? So on page 96, suppose
now you are making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery.
How many people here has read this thing before they found a sponsor or found somebody to help them? Usually somebody finds us and then they drag us through this kicking and screaming. Right? Anybody kicking and screaming? This don't make no sense. This is a bunch of bullshit. I got better things to do other than this. I got my own program to work on here. So here, right? Go ahead.
Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice.
See, having had the experience yourself, if a person hasn't been through this, can they take you through it?
No.
You know how many people are sponsoring people in the Fellowship of AA who have never done this? Have never done this. They're sponsoring people to do what? Acceptance. Just read 419. Surrender. They're sponsoring people in some other ideas other than this. And if you're alcoholic, how well does that seem to work? Well, let's see. How many people's relapsed here?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, okay. So, obviously, like if I went to a mechanic with my... I just finished working on my daughter's car for the last couple of days. If I went to a mechanic with a certain problem, I would trust that they would know how to fix it, especially if I paid them to do it, right or wrong.
Right.
And if I left that place and the problem happened again, and I went back to the same mechanic to fix it again and they didn't fix it again, right? I'm under the impression they fixed it because it seems like they fixed it. I drive a little and then it happened again. How many people would go back to the same mechanic? How many people has gone back to the same treatment center and the same sponsor?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Oh, now we're picking it up here. Wait a minute. So everything you've been telling me and I've been doing hasn't worked so far, but let me try it again. And so after 11 years of in and out, like I catch on fast, eh? So after 11 years of in and out, this guy 12-stepped me through the book. It was the first guy in 11 years who's ever 12-stepped me through the book. He took me through the book. He conned me into it. He took me through it, having had the experience himself. And guess what's happened as the result of doing this course of action based on their experience? This April will be 32 years. So I've been in the fellowship 43 years. 43 years. I've been sober as the result of this course of action coming up to 32 years. I don't know if anybody's as smart as I am, but I catch on fast, eh? Like, after 11 years of my way, Burger King sobriety, right? I didn't have a clue that I was doomed to failure because I didn't understand the illness. So when they took me through this, that's our job now, is to take other people through this. Is it not? The exact same way that we were taken through it. And if you have a sponsor that's not taking you through the book, they're not sponsoring you. What they are is your friend, counselor, whatever, confidant, ego boost, but they're not a sponsor. A sponsor is a guide that guides you through this course of action. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is based on. This message in this book. If you're being offered something other than this, like Novelco series, 12 by 12, treatment centers, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not ours. It's not endorsed by us.
No.
If you're doing that outside of our facility, by all means, but don't bring it in here and try to pass it on to other people because it worked for you. What you end up probably doing is killing other people who are real alcoholics that won't work for. How many people's relapsed here over and over? Doing other methods and all these ideas we hear. We don't drink no matter what. Well, I seem to drink no matter what. Anybody here? I don't need a matter. It's like, I just drink. So people are baffled. People within our own fellowship are baffled with people like us who can't stay sober. They think AA was designed for people who can stay sober. AA was designed for people who can't stay sober. How many people find that surprising? Like, you shouldn't be surprised when somebody's relapsed in AA. We all act shocked. I can't believe you relapsed. Really? Really? I can't believe that person's still drinking. I can't believe they can't get this thing. Well, what have they done? Nothing. Gone to meetings and collect chips. Meeting makers make it. No, they don't. They make it to the next drink, but they don't make it to sobriety. So we're baffled. So when we carry this message, I went on a tangent there. It saved my life. And all the guys I work with, I make sure they can show me what they're talking about. They just don't talk out of their ass. If I hear you say something and I sponsor you, I'll go, that sounded great. Can you show me where it says that? Well, it kind of says that. Then kind of don't say that then. We don't do kind of stuff here. It doesn't say that or don't say it, right? Rarely have we seen a person fail. So, they hit some points here on working with others. They talk about here, when all else fails, working with another alcoholic will save the day. Who else introduced us to that idea? Was Bill, right? He talked, but what he had before that was a course of action that he was able to implement that created some change where he was able to get past himself to go carry this message to somebody else. How many people has been really afflicted with self here before this course of action? When you're in the bondage yourself, there's no way of getting past that to go help somebody. Anybody ever notice that? Anybody crippled by your own thinking and your own emotions and your own impending doom? So when they talk about here on page 88, they talk about we alcoholics are undisciplined. So we let God discipline us in the simple way we've just outlined. So that means they've given us a formula. The same formula that the first 100 men and women have, the same formula that Bill talked about that saved the day when all other methods failed. But they had certain methods that they put into place. What are those methods? We just learned that. These steps turn into principles, right? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message, not a message, to alcoholics and to practice these principles. So what are the principles for? The principles are to keep me connected to source, a power greater than myself. The steps were not designed to work on the steps. That's treatment center idea. Because when you're focused on the steps, what are you not focused on?
My relationship.
Your relationship. So you see how the mind starts working. So it's like a magnet. The idea, what was our first obsession that the book introduced us to?
Self-fixing self.
On page 23, that was our obsession, to fix ourselves. Nobody have that problem in this group, eh? Anybody obsessed with themselves and their plans, their designs, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and here's my... And then we try to convince other people that it sounds like a good idea, and then they give us another 24-hour chip. Great idea. Great idea. Your program's working great for you. How do you know that? Look at the look on your face. Right? You watch people say, well, my program, if you want what I got, the promises are coming true. It's like, holy, somebody should inform your face, right? Because it doesn't sound like no promises are coming true. You don't even look somewhat thrilled. They say you'll be amazed before you're halfway through. Not somewhat thrilled. Most people in AA are just a little under somewhat thrilled. You ever hear people talk about the promises? Oh, yeah, the promises are like, anyways, moving on. So this idea. So what's this idea when all else fails? So as we back up on page 87, they talk about this thing becoming a working part of the mind. What becoming a working part of the mind? This recipe. What recipe? The recipe that they've introduced us to from the beginning, but we didn't know they were taking us through a process. So now when you reverse it, what they're going to kind of look at here is the working part of the mind is to be able to assess. So what is the principle of step one? Right? When you look back now, it becomes a principle, is the ability to assess what the problem is. People say honesty. Well, honesty about the sin, but it talks about honesty about being able to assess what's happening in your life. Where's the disturbance coming from? What instinct is interfering me that causes me to have this internal dialogue or this internal anxiety? What's creating that? So to be able to assess my life based on the inventory process that I learned that created self. So I see out of this is where my problems, that sets the ball in motion. Does that kind of make sense? So you need to do the 4-step in order to see how self creates my own problems. Right? So how many people found it really amazing when they went through the 4th that they found these things in your own personality that caused your failure? Right? And it was the resentments, the fears, the harms, and the conduct. So I see how these things arise out of self, and they cause my conflict with people, places, and things. And there's no way of entirely getting over those things without applying these prayers and these ideas. Right? So how many people have hear people say, I work on step 10, but all the information is actually in step 4. How many people say, I do step 4 every day?
No.
Well, that's actually what you're saying. Because what did we learn in step 4 is how to master resentment.
Yep.
Did not, right? How to have these emotions where they're not blocking us off from a power grid. Where did we learn that recipe on how to assess these things and work toward the removal of them and how to master resentment?
Step 4.
Step 4, right? So it's interesting. So if we kind of go back now, this what becomes a working part of the mind is this thing that they talk about here on page 66. And you see they're tying in, they tell us what this whole thing is about. So on page 66 is what we're really learning in 11. We're developing it in 11. Right? Well, what makes you say that? Well, let's revisit 4 now and see the whole purpose of this thing. So, everybody on 66, go ahead. It is plain.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
True or false?
True.
That means deep. It's been there a long time, and you don't really know it's there all the time, but it's still eating your lunch and making decisions for you. So this goes back to what we read on page 54. So if you kind of go, and we're going to do a bit of bouncing back and forth. This is for people who's already been through it. But you'll see I'm tying this all together. So on 54, they talked about, in the middle of it, did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? On 54, they talk about our belief system, that we're all governed by a belief system and worship. We worship certain things and ideas. Where we spend our energy. Anybody? So we don't think we have, when you say, oh, we don't worship things. Well, how many people think about things as soon as you have it, they'll fix your problems? How many people worship the idea of certain, if I had this, if I had that? Are you not spending all your energy thinking about something that you don't have that will fix it? Is that not a form of worship?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
How many people spend a lot of time there before?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't interesting, right? And so how many people spend these feelings? How many people have acted on certain feelings and ideas that cause problems in their relationship, family, friends, and people around them?
Yeah.
These feelings, not based on anything, but they're a driving force. And then they go in your mind and nobody can talk you out of it. Oh, how that? That's exactly it. Nobody can talk you out of it, right? Anybody have those thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, driving.
Driving. And then afterwards, a part of you goes, this, like, it's real, fancy it or real. So these things are driving you, and they're causing conflict with people, places, and things. People who are observing you are asking, what's your problem? Anybody ever ask you what your problem is? And you get more indignant and more pissed off because now you know you're right. And then that ends up on your amends list because you weren't right. How many people's had arguments with people who are not even there and waiting for them to come home so you can finish the argument? You're nuts. But The person, whoever it is, comes home. Mom, dad, brother, sister, partner, kids. They come home. You're nuts, frothing at the mouth. And they go, what's the matter with you? You know what's the matter with me.
You did this.
Anybody? Okay, so these things arise out of ourselves. We place ourselves in a position to be hurt. So we discovered that in the fourth step, right? So what we need to do is have these things either removed or rearranged within inside of us so we have a different thing going through our process in our thinking. So as we view the world, we could take a different course of action and have a different outcome. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So it is plain. Go there again. We're going to go back to 66.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these...
Hold it. To the precise extent that we permit these. What are they talking about? Now we have two ways of looking at things. There's our way based on instincts. We've seen what that looks like in our fourth that created our problem. Now they've given us a new way of looking at things, which is spiritual based. Right? And to assess what's course of action I want to... So the principle of step one is, what's the problem? The principle of step two is, what's the spiritual solution and course of action necessary to create a change in this area? Step three is, do I want to pursue this spiritual solution or do I want to go at my own? And that's why the second half of how it works talks about being convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. Am I still going to be driven by these ideas, these emotions, and these resentments and these flaws in my character, or am I going to seek something greater than me to overcome these things to have a different outcome in my life? Right? But in order to do that, I need to be able to assess, to detach from it and shift focus. It doesn't say this thing isn't happening, but my focus becomes... Anybody ever ride a bicycle here? Or a motorcycle? How many people's ridden a bike or a motorcycle? So, one of the things they teach you without realizing is where you look is where you go. Right? I got a bike. When I went and I did a safety course, a defensive driving course, and they said, always pick a path. Never look at the accident. Pick a path. And where you look, your bike will go. That has saved my life 4 times driving my bike. Right? Because before, anybody remember as a kid driving your bike, you look at the accident, where did you end up? Where did your bike end up? Right in the accident. You're looking at where you don't want to go. Where's your bike going? You're looking at where you're going to crash. Anybody been there and crashed their bike?
Yeah.
How many people's done that here? Come on. Can't be the only one. So, and that's the same with this. All we used to look at was the accident. We didn't have no other way of looking. And where are you going? So what you're creating by participating in these things, right, to the precise extent that we permit these, that means you're engaged in your own thinking. It has you hostage. And then it's changing your emotional state. Anxiety starts happening. Anybody that aware of their functions now? And that's that step 11 stuff, right? So, but what we do is we stay in the story until it gets so uncomfortable that we got to create a diversion or another problem that snaps us out of this problem. Remember, probably nobody in this group, remember the old LPs? When the record would get stuck, it'd go over and over and over. You'd either have to hit the record player, it all depends how loaded you were, right? You'd hit the record player and you'd skip right across. Or you put pennies on it. And remember that? You put pennies in and it adds weight. So next time it came across that defect in the album with the weight on it, it would go to the next groove. It didn't stagnate anymore. And that's what we're learning here. The weight is prayer or my connection with something greater than myself. It's the same kind of scenario, right? Because life is a continuation of the same events over and over and over again. Anybody ever noticed that yet? So, okay, go ahead.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile?
It's like a prison in the mind,
right?
But with the alcoholic...
Watch this now. Underline this, because this is a theme through the whole book. Underline it. If here it would say, but with the alcoholic whose hope was to work on these steps every day, it would say that, wouldn't it? If the idea was to work on the steps every day, don't you think it would say that somewhere here?
Yep.
Does anybody could show me anywhere where it says to work on the steps every day? That's a treatment center idea that came in here for those who can work on themselves. We don't work on ourselves. When we work on ourselves, problems happen. Anybody ever notice that? The more you work on yourself, the more miserable everybody around you becomes. A couple of people poking their partner here. Okay, go ahead. Let's read on before we cause a problem here. Some lady in the other room. Did you hear that? No, okay, go ahead.
But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience.
Whose hope is what? The maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. That's what we're learning here. That's where our focus is. Right? It's not my behaviors, because that's deceiving. I could be very deceived by my behavior here. Anybody?
Yep.
But whether my consciousness, whether I'm clicked into this or not, I can't be deceived by that. I know when I'm clicked in, and I know when I'm not. Because when I'm not clicked in, who am I thinking about? Me. Who am I focused on? My problems. Me. I'm anxiety-based. Anybody anxiety-based here? That's because you hear everybody says, I have an anxiety disorder. No, you have a thinking disorder. Right? I would have anxiety too if I was thinking the shit you've been thinking all day. You make people nervous. You know, people, yeah, I can hardly stand myself, never mind anybody else in the room, right? And I'm never alone. Anybody here ever gone to a meeting and you enter a room and you could just feel the level of mental health in the room? Anybody? How many people's felt that? You go, and then you realize you're alone? Exactly. Okay. So, go ahead.
Okay. I'll go back to, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit.
Okay, so when harboring such feelings, so what are the feelings they're derivative of? Is my thinking. Is it not? So a lot of people are trying to sort out their feelings. It's not your feelings that's causing your problem. It's your thinking. And if I'm spiritually off, how am I going to be thinking? It's going to be whacked. And how am I going to be feeling? So remember they talked about when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and emotionally, physically, right? Yeah. So we see that the core is like when you throw a pebble into the water, what creates all the ripples in the water is the size of the pebble you throw in the water. It creates all the ripples, right? Yes or no? Yeah. So we see that these thoughts and ideas is what's caused the ripple effect through my life. So here, go ahead.
The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again.
So so we see here is a thing here. What they're saying is a lot of people think it's my behavior. A lot of people could do certain conduct and be fine for years, but what they talk about here is the things that cut me off from this relationship. Right? What some people have no problems doing may get me loaded. How will it get me loaded? Is it because it cuts me off from the sunlight, cuts me off from my relationship. Right? That's the important part. So it could be very deceiving. So some people do things that, like what we used to say, if you can live with the consequences behind me, do whatever you want. Right? That's the guys I sobered up with. So here, I got to find out the things that cut me off from the sunlight of the spirit, because that's what gets me loaded. I can't harbor these feelings and these ideas. These things that cause me guilt, shame, and remorse. Anybody ever get in that conduct? Or get found out for things? Like you're okay doing something until you get caught. Now you're not having a problem with what you were doing. You're having a problem that you got caught. Yeah. But we'll leave that one alone. Not that any of us ever had that problem. So So we see here, the first thing we learned is how to master resentment. The second thing we learned, and how many people said, oh, I'm doing the 4-step fear process. How many people you heard talk about that in meetings? But the recipe here on page 68 is exactly that. They talk about here, perhaps there's a better way. And this is the recipe we take into 11. We're proactive now. You hear people say, well, when they talk about step 10, the idea of how to do step 10 is in 11. If you're doing step 10, guess what step you're not doing? You're not doing 11. If you're always in conflict with people, places, and things, I can guarantee you're not practicing these principles, because these are proactive, meaning I don't get into the same jackpot each and every time because I see it coming this time because of the meditation of it becoming a working part of the mind. So when I review my day at night, is step 11. I review my day, see where I was in conflict with people, places, and things. Which instinct got the best of me? Was it fear, resentment, harms, conduct? What was it that caused this problem today? What instinct got in the way of this situation that caused a different outcome, less than I was hoping for? And then so tomorrow, it asked me, what corrective measures can I take spiritually? So that means the next day when I end up in that situation, I kind of subside the energy that's happening in me to take a different response. Does that kind of make sense? So the example I use a lot of times is I'm on my way to work and I'm in a hurry because I slept in. I have anxiety. I'm on my way to work. I don't want to be late. And I'm creating conflict on the road now because of my anxiety based on my instincts. This guy cuts me off and slams on his brakes and gives me the finger. I think about him all day. Is he now consuming my thoughts, my energy, and affecting my whole day?
Straight up eating your lunch, yep.
Now the next day, that night, I decide not to do 11 because I don't know how to do 11. So what am I still hanging on to? That guy. The next day I get in my car, who am I looking for?
That guy.
That guy. See, I didn't take corrective measures spiritually, so what that means is I'm still be driven by self. I'm going to push him off the road. Not that I've ever done like this. Anyways, I've already done a 5. So what happens is, and this is any situation. So now I see how this fear, the resentment, and conduct has caused these problems based on my instincts that I've created. My spiritual condition is slide, right? So that night I kind of review my day. I said, yeah, you know what? If I would have done a bit of meditation, if I would have listened to some spiritual tuning or something on the way there, where they talk about on that page is we memorize some set prayers. What's the first prayer we memorize? On page 87, they talk about the serenity prayer, something that I could focus on other than focusing on me. Right? So the next day I get up and ask what corrective measures I could take. Is pause, do some prayers, right? Get up a little early. I'm on the way there and I see the guy. These emotions come up. I acknowledge that these emotions are starting to come to the surface. A part of my brain wants to take corrective measures. You get what I'm saying? I pause, pray, and ask to do the right thing. Even though my energy wants to do something else, I subside that energy by focusing on doing the right thing, and I let them go by, and I even say sorry for causing that the next day. I kind of go, sorry, whatever. Does that kind of make sense? I've now created a different outcome for that day in my life. Now, if you did that with every situation in your life, with people, places, then what would your relationship start looking like? What would the treatment center start looking like? What would the relationship with people, places, things, your parents, what would the relationships look like in your world if you're able to have restrained a tongue and change how you respond to people or how you conduct yourself? How would you start feeling? So when they say this becomes a working part of the mind, and when we kind of look this way, they talk about, on page 69, they talk about, in this way we try to shape a sane and sound idea for our future sex. So we see all the ideas that we get here, the conduct. You don't hear people say, you hear people say, I'll do 10, 11, and 12. No, you do 11, which is all the principles that engage spiritual change. Why is that? Because if I'm spiritually right, anybody ever notice when you're spiritually right, what else is right?
Everything.
Everything. Because you're able to match calamity with serenity. Right? Even though the life's around. Like, my daughter's car, I put it in the tune-up, got her tune-up, got all her brakes done, everything was fantastic. That night, her turpentine belt, whatever you call it, blew on the side of the car. She's on the side of the road. I had to get my tools and go get her. I missed the study last night, Tuesday. I heard it was a fantastic study, absolutely mind-bending, but it was all new people there. So, no, that's not just Joe. I love Joe. Joe's a great guy. So I went and dealt with that. 2 hours on the side of the road, and this one part was busted. But my daughter was there, and her boyfriend was there, and how I conducted myself for that 2 hours was really cool. It was cold and all that stuff, and I'm bent in this little Mazda car. I'm a big guy, and my back's going tweaking, and I couldn't fix it. So then we got it. My wife ordered a BCAA membership, gave it to my daughter, got a tow truck, got it towed to my place. That day I spent 2 hours working on it. They gave me the wrong belt. I went back and I asked for the right belt. They didn't have it. I went somewhere else. And my daughter goes, well, did you get mad? I said, for what? Did I get upset inside for a second? Yes. Right? 20 years ago would have involved police and my conduct of getting barred in the store. 100%. Because if I have a problem, you have a problem. Anybody like that around here? Nobody like that around here. And everybody's entitled to my thinking about what I think is going on here. And if I have a problem, where's the manager? And so my daughter goes, what did you say to her? I said, the person's making minimum wage. They're doing the best they can. What am I going to do? Right? I didn't know. And so I went and got a new part and spent 2 hours. And then I said, why don't you Google this thing? Because I prayed about it and something said, why don't you Google it? And then I found out the tensioning belt thing is busted. So I prayed about it, and then I said, something said, phone your friend. So I, like that intuitive, just pausing, praying, changed the whole outcome of everything. My friend came over, bought lunch for him, we fixed it. My daughter came and got the car. What a great experience. Now, did I create that? My relationship to Source created that, because inside I had all those little explosions, all those little voices. Anybody have the voices, the natter, the energy? But I did not allow that to become the determining factor in that moment, in that day. Why? Because my spiritual condition's in tune. Why? Because I do step 11. So what I see is, what I'm doing is really enhancing step 4. Am I not? So now, something happens in my life and I'm not doing very well. I can't seem to create a shift. So if we go back over to page 87, this becoming a working part of the mind. The more I study this, the more I see it's a recipe for revolutionary change, spiritual development. It puts me on a whole different playing field, puts me into the 4th dimension. It moves me from an instinct-based life to a spiritual-based life. It's phenomenal. This is a game changer, and it was designed that way, that the only step that or process that we were supposed to develop on a daily basis is actually 11, because 11 enhances everything we've learned so far. And so what have we learned so far? The recipe for this whole thing is to pause. It's one of the main instincts that are involved in the 3. So most of us have only 2 of them. It's fight or flight. Anybody have the fight or flight instinct here? There's actually a 3rd instinct. It's the pause instinct. But for people like us, the pause would mean our own demise. Like, anybody have that kind of stuff here? I know I got to be reactive, like really fast, because if you pause, you're in trouble, right? Anybody come from that lifestyle? So here, but this is all about the pause. So in 87, they talk about working part of the mind, to be able to pause, to assess what's going on, pray for the right thought, and the answer will come. It's really amazing how if you kind of sit there for a second, even go through the serenity prayer and ask for the right idea to overcome fear. To overcome fear doesn't mean fear's not there anymore, but you're able to do the next right thing. You're able to stay at work when everything wants you to leave work. You're able to be of service when everything wants you to you override those own landmines within inside of you. How many people have experienced that here? Yep. Anybody you're not turning those landmines into grenades anymore. There's no collateral damage. What's happening inside, you remember those pressure cookers? You know, with the thing on it, what that's designed for is to release some of the energy so the thing doesn't blow up. We're very reactive people. We all are. Some of our biggest problems in early sobriety is anger. A lot of people think demonstrated to other people. No, internal anger. Internal. Other people don't have to see it. Anybody been pissed off at you more than you? How many people talk shit to themselves all day here? Look at that. That means correcting that talk is a part of the amend process. Correcting how you talk to you and how you view yourself is a part of this thing. The pause and no, that's not correct. That's not how God sees me. That's not how my friends see me. This is not who I am. That's how I used to be, but I'm not this way anymore. Anybody remember that Clint Eastwood movie, Unforgiven?
Yeah.
That's how I used to be. I ain't that way anymore. As long as he doesn't drink. It's a great movie anyways. And so that's what they're talking about here, right? And so down at the bottom, as we go through the day, now back up here. If circumstances warrant, right? Go ahead.
If circumstances warrant...
Page 87, sorry, go ahead.
If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing.
Okay, why? Why would they ask us to do that? Because they want us to have something other to focus on other than your own thinking. Because your thinking is geared in such a way that it knows you better than you, and it wants to put you into the maze. Once you're in the maze, you stay there. It takes some form of diversion to get you out of the maze. We could spend hours there without realizing we're in it. Right? Anybody ever watch a TV show? You're engaged in it. A commercial comes on, and halfway through the commercial, you forget what show you're watching? Because you've been thinking. Anybody driving their car go through a couple lights and it's like, were they all green? Or been in a meeting? And you ever notice, how many people notice when you used to go to a meeting and you sat there and it'd take the first 10 or 15 minutes to get through all the thoughts you were having? That moment, everything catches up with your subconscious and say, this is everything that's going on with you. You're kind of like, holy shit, right? And you're kind of like trying to get through it. Anybody, I'm trying to explain it in the best way I know how. You show up, right? And then you got to find a way where you can put you aside and be present to hear what's happening. And like this meeting, how many people has been all over the place and you never even left the room? You got an idea and then your brain left.
Linda, she's doing it pretty good.
Linda. So you see how the brain works? You get an idea, you don't even realize it's happening. Now you're engaged in your thinking. Then something happens and then you come back to the moment. Anybody have that? So the form of meditation is here. I'm going to give some meditation stuff. So the form of meditation is to be present. How do I be present? Well, if I'm at work, praying the strength to be at work, to be of service and to focus on what I'm doing, right? And anything that has to do with the future, reminding myself that God has the future. Or I'll talk to my sponsor later about this. Once I have an answer for future things, then I remind myself that's already taken care of. God, give me the strength to be present. Does that kind of make sense? So meditation is, how many people's read here? How many people's read something here? Read. So when you read, do you notice you are thinking? How many people are diverted by their thinking when they go to read? So what happens is, this is the start of meditation, is the ability to concentrate. So what happens is, if you're reading a paragraph, like say if you start on the top of 87, and Rob was reading, so Rob's reading out loud, so he's more focused. If his thinking was to interrupt him, he would stumble over the words. And that happens sometimes, right? You start thinking about what you're thinking, and then you stumble over the words. So what happens is, he needs to be more concentrated on what you're doing. That's meditation, where he doesn't allow his thinking to interrupt his process, and then his reading is a lot more fluent. You notice that? You know, and so it's like when you're reading, at first you could do it out loud, or stop and reread it again. stop, reread it again, and what happens? You start getting discipline in your mind. You start getting discipline. If you're in a meeting, what I used to do, my sponsor taught me, is to repeat what people were saying. Unless they were talking shit, then you could go start thinking for a while till they're done. But most of the time when they're reading how it works, I'd repeat it all the time just to stay present. Or I'd feel the anxiety. How many people's had anxiety here from thinking? Form of meditation is to acknowledge that this is happening. Stop and take a big breath. Because when you're thinking, you lean over. Anybody ever notice that? You kind of more... So form of meditation is to stop and take a big breath. And when you take a big breath, all your system gets re-energized, meaning you're stepping away from the fight or flight. You're energizing, I don't know how to say it, you're energizing your system by giving it oxygen. And then if you're having too big of a problem, you start concentrating on your breathing. It may sound weird, but you stop thinking about what you're thinking about. And if you're a really good alcoholic, what you'll do is, what was I thinking about? That seems to be working. What was I thinking about? And you'll try to go back to find out what you were thinking. So that's a form of meditation, is to be able to just concentrate on your breathing and to be where your feet are. How many people have problems sleeping here? The anxiety. So what I was taught, this is for those with the set prayers, was my sponsor taught me, and this is coming up to 32 years. I thought it was close the other night. He says, I've never met anybody who's been able to do the Lord's Prayer 3 times in a row without falling asleep. As early as this is when I had like pending federal charge, like I was looking at penitentiary time. I was turning myself, like I was a train wreck in early sobriety. Like I think the first 7 years after that it got easy, but it was to me it was the best life I ever lived. People witnessing me thought I was still a train wreck, but I was living large compared to how I used to be. I was doing really good. So, anyways, so he says, you know what? Why don't you do the Lord's Prayer 3 times? I said, don't work. I said, I did it 3 times. He said, no. He said, when you started thinking again, as you were doing a prayer, did you stop and start over again? He says, I've never met anybody who can do the prayer 3 times in a row without interruption who's ever fallen asleep. The other night I had some stuff going on, and I was thinking, tonight's the night, first time in 31 years that, and then part of my brain says, no, you weren't concentrating, you're thinking. So I said, okay, I'll do it again. And I started doing a prayer, and I fell asleep. Another one is playing Frisbee with a dog on the beach. May sound kind of weird, but that's a form of meditation, to be where you want to be. So you're walking along the beach, you feel the sand going between your toes, you hear, and you're concentrating on this. So what you're doing is you're actually being in control of your thinking, instead of your thinking being in control of you. So you're walking along the beach, you're playing Frisbee, and you're there, and next thing you know, you wake up in the morning, you've had a good sleep. That's a form of meditation. During the day, I'm being perplexed by problems I'm having. So do the 3rd step prayer. Read Sermon on the Mount. Excellent book. Way of the Peaceful Warrior. But finding books that kind of pray. Your biggest asset now is to pray. Hey, God, can you direct me to what you'd like me to read or what you'd like me to do? Because remember, that's your biggest tool now is prayer. Right? Trusting and relying on God. Grow and develop this thing. And watch what starts happening when you pray for direction and strength to do these right things. So now if you're jammed into a problem that you can't shake. Anybody have those? So I use an example. When my brother was, he was 32, so this is a while ago now. Holy smokes, 32 and 58. He's a year younger. So when I was 33, was a while ago. I'm 58 now. I can't even how long. I was 11 years sober or something like that. He was dying of full-blown AIDS, cirrhosis of the liver. So when I went back to Toronto, I spent a week and a half with him in the hospital, being his nursemaid, feeding him, showering him. Like he was my brother. I loved him with all my heart. How difficult that was to be a part of that. How many times I've just prayed for the strength to do and memorized certain prayers as he was coughing up blood. And so he ended up kind of dying, drowning in his own kind of thing. It was really, but I loved him through the whole process, and it was really cool that I was able to be there for him. Same when my dad died, same with people who've passed in my life, I was able to be there for them and override the things about me. Does that kind of make sense? And that's the difference with this thing is if you learn how to be of service, it changes the focus from you to them. These things aren't happening to you. God ain't doing this for you to learn a lesson. This is a part of life, and it's happening to them. But the mentality is, for us, that self-centeredness, which is stage 1 recovery, is all about me. Stage 2 recovery is all about everybody but me. How could I be of maximum, to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people around me? You look at the most happiest people in AA are the people who their primary relationship is a power greater than themselves. And all their needs get met. Everything like something just happens. They've tapped into something beyond their comprehension. It's a phenomena, and these remarkable events come to pass. It's really like, it's the highlight of my life is step 11. It is really remarkable. So what happens is you go work with another alcoholic. When your ass is falling off, you pick it up and you go find another alcoholic to work with. And when you're working with them, what you're going through, you realize what you're going through, they're praying to get to that stage. Right? They're detoxing. Maybe it's 4 days since they've had a shower or whatever. They're in a meeting and they're just vibrating. You shake their hand and it's all greasy. And you know what I mean? Like a good one, a puker, eh? You find a puker and you start working with them and there's nothing left. He's burnt his life or her life down to the ground and they can't even see daylight. And what you're bringing is a bit of light. You're bringing a bit of light to their life that maybe they can get through whatever they're getting through. And as you work with them, man, you leave there thinking, thank you, God. Thank you, God, that I've gone through what they've gone through because somebody was there for me. We learn to be agents, right? We're agents of something greater than ourselves, and we trust and rely on that. So this intuitiveness is that voice that we come to rely on. We don't have to ask why all the time, right? And so one of the examples is one probably, I have thousands of these because I come and trust and rely on. And you hear these stories in AA all the time. If God's directing my life, then I got to trust that what's happening will work out to the greater good. This guy was window cleaner, 18 multi-story building. And he was supposed to go work somewhere else, but he ended up being dispatched to a place that was an hour farther than he was supposed to go. And he was pissed off about the idea. But he starts says, God, you must have a reason for wanting me to go this way. Whatever you have planned for me, allow me to be an agent and be of service. So he's cleaning, he started up on the 18th floor and he's going down floor by floor. He doesn't know there's a guy standing on his balcony and there's empty. There's enough room for him to stand there and he's smoking a cigarette and his fingers are all yellow and the guy's talking to God. The guy needs some help and he's asking God what to do. He dropped into the balcony as this guy was praying. Cleaning windows, he drops in the bed. Hey, how you doing? No shit. That's mind-boggling stuff. I had a guy working in the movie industry. He was on one of the sets, huge, tons of me. He was on a set. He was sitting on a pile of lumber. There was nobody else on the set. He called. He needed some help. I went out as a day call. And I said, I don't want to go on a day call. I said, well, maybe God has. I said, okay, God, you want me to go in there? I'll go there. So I go to this. I open the door, and he's sitting inside this big, huge studio. It's all dark. He's sitting there, and he's perplexed with himself and his life, and he's asking God for some direction and help. And he says he couldn't see who it was. And as I got closer, all I heard him saying, you're kidding. You got to be kidding me. He was an AA member, and he was like, he said that out loud, you got to be kidding. Right? Because 2 seconds earlier, he was asking for help. One of the most profound stories of being of service. And this is the same thing that happened for us. How many people's had that experience where somebody showed up in your life? An agent of something greater than you showed up to direct you from whatever mess you were in. How many people's had that guide or that help or that situation where something showed up? Remember in Bill's story? Where the second time he was in treatment, he talked what he wouldn't give. He gave that I call it the beacon to the universe. This thing inside cried out to whatever, right? What he wouldn't give to fix his life. And who shows up in Bill's life? Ebby. Ebby called Bill. Bill didn't call Ebby. Pretty wild, right? So I'll close with this story. I'm in Hawaii, right? I live in Vancouver. I'm in Hawaii. I'm supposed to get this whole chain of events didn't happen. So I went upstairs. My wife goes, what's going on? I said, third time in a row I went to this meeting, wasn't happening. I said, you know what, I'm just going to go smoke a cigar over by the palm trees over there on the grass and just kind of relax. So I'm heading downstairs. I said, God, you know, you must have something planned for me. What do you want? He says, go smoke the cigar over on the breakwater. It was like, I said, it's way over there. This is how I talk to God. I said, it's way over there. I could go over there. He says, go smoke over there. So I take my cigar, I go over there. I'm sitting on the breakwater like this, talking to God, really gratitude. And I see this guy, he's about 30 feet away from me, and his hands are in the air, and he's just doing all this stuff, and the water's coming up, and he's drinking beer. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. He walks by me, he goes, hey, you want a snow cone? I said, no, what the hell, where are you getting a snow cone this time of morning? He says, no, a beer. Why they weren't beside him is beyond me. He grabbed the beer, he walks by me again, he stops, and he starts talking to me. He said, I don't know why I'm talking to you. He says, I was just talking to God, why God abandoned me. So my wife just left me. I used to have 8 years of sobriety. He says, I live on the other side of the island. Something told me to come over here so I could be at peace and be alone, to sit on this side of the island, the big island. He came all the way to sit in that spot. God had me sit in that spot. And I said, allow me to introduce myself. My name's Tony. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're not alone. There's something greater than you looking after you, and he wants you to know that he hasn't abandoned you. What you've done is walked away from him. The relationship's there for all of us, and that's what this course of action is all about. And this is what this whole thing is about, right? It's how an unexplainable life, right? So thank you for being a part of this. This is awesome, and I hope you guys enjoyed this just as much as I did. I know Joe needed to hear what I had to say tonight. So that's what you got. Some house cleaning stuff, Joe?
Yeah, Tony, that was awesome. Thanks, everybody. Joe, yeah, we got the Big Book Study workshop sheets. We have those up available in the chat. Email any of the members of the Keystone group, and they'll be happy to give that to you. We also put up our 7th tradition information there. GSO AA as a whole is suffering since the pandemic, so our meeting here contributes 99% of it to GSO. All we do is pay for the Zoom room. We have no other expenses. So just so you know, all your contributions go directly to AA. Other than that, yeah, we have the Tony.R Big Book Study Workshop talks online on YouTube there. So if you missed out on any of the talks, you want to follow up, catch up, get up to date. It's great. It's at Tony.R Vancouver. It's on YouTube, and we have playlists on there. We have other videos. Just pick one and have at her.
And the worksheets are on there also. You could download, and it's all the book. It's nothing outside of the book. It's all book-based recovery, terminology, everything. Get you started. Right on.
Awesome. And the third step prayer.
Close with the third step prayer. What's the first requirement in making this thing happen? Go ahead, Joe. God.
Offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Lead me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, victory over them, and bear witness to those that would help, thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Awesome.
May the force be with you, live long and prosperous, and we'll have a meeting after the meeting here.